Guys. So thank you so much for making the time to join us today. So I'd like to start by introducing Terry and Phil. So I'll start with Terry. Terry's got over 30 years experience in leadership roles within the US promotional products industry. As the executive sponsor of Halo's sustainability program, he'll share with us today how sustainability has become a key revenue driver for the company. And along with Terry, we've got Phil, who is the co-chair of Halo's sustainability program, focusing on customer acquisition and strategic growth. Phil will discuss with us today the alignment of ESG strategies with stakeholder expectations and market demands. Welcome on board, gents, and thank you for sharing your time with us.
Thank you very much for having us. Probably best, Robert, if I give everyone on the call a little bit of a background on Halo and Halo's relation in relative size and scope in the industry in the US. And then I'll talk a little bit about our ESG journey, and then we'll have some, well, if we don't have the slides that are able to come up from this, if Phil's not able to do that, then we can just talk through that as well. That's fine. So Halo is the second largest promotional products company in the US, promotional products distributor in the US, with about $950 million in revenue. And the promotional industry in the US is around $26 billion. And so, we're roughly around 5% of that or so. And the largest promotional products company is a pure e-commerce company called 4imprint in the US. And so where Halo is different is that we're really kind of a microcosm of the distributor marketplace in the US. We have an e-commerce solution. We do fulfillment programs where we have warehousing, we have web stores, we have for our clients, and a variety of other things. We have around 70,000 clients, and that could be everything from a small business down the road to some of the largest global brands. And those are the largest global brands are the ones that we'll really be focusing on today in terms of market trends. But we process around 500,000 individual orders a year. And so if you were to look at the industry overall, from the highest volume salesperson down to the lowest, in terms of the customer mix of every other distributor, Halo would very much reflect the industry overall. And so these market trends that we're going to be sharing today that have been our experience, likewise would then be the experience of generally distributors in the US and what we're seeing overall here. Does that cover it? And I believe there was also going to be a chat feature. And in the chat feature, if there are any questions in terms of anything that Phil or I say today, please use the chat feature. And if we can catch that chat, or if you can bring it up, Robert, we can address those questions. So in terms of ESG here in the States, we started our sustainability journey in 2019 formally. Prior to that, we had really led the industry in the US in product integrity. And so a lot of product testing protocols, product recall protocols, and a variety of other things. And we did that based on market demand by some larger global brands that we had acquired right around kind of the 2005, 2006 range. And we're owned by a private equity group, and it's our sixth private equity sponsor. And so when they purchased us about 6 years ago, they said, yeah, your product integrity is nice, but you really don't have any formal ESG program. And to do business globally and in our portfolio of companies, you have to have a more formalized ESG program. And so Phil and I were the ones that started the ESG program in 2018, along with a consultant that was a Harvard-educated ESG specialist that really helped us move forward faster. And as the demands in the marketplace grew from our customers, so did our activities, as you can see here from our sustainability journey. Every year, when you look at the things that we're doing from an ESG standpoint, it's worth noting that these are additive. And so we didn't stop doing those things in 2019 and then focused on something in 2020. those were in addition to those things in 2019. And so if you look at 2023 and looked at the list of those things that we focus on ESG, which are very extensive, it runs all the way back to those things we started in 2019 as well. And the things, as I mentioned, the different efforts that we're involved in and the metrics that we're doing and some of the different initiatives that we have are all based on customer request, either customers in general or very specific customer request. And now, as Robert mentioned, Phil is the co-chair of our sustainability committee. And so rather than just me and Phil back in 2018, 2019, now we have about 7 people that are working on these different initiatives within Halo. And they work with the different teams within Halo, whether it's human resources or our warehouse, our distribution center, or our accounting team, to make sure that we can get these things done. It's worth noting, and Robert, I think you had mentioned it early on, but again, we're a $950 million distributor in terms of total revenue, and about 20% of our revenue is directly tied to these initiatives and to the things that we're doing with ESG. And when we look at that 20% of revenue, it really breaks down into current customers that have developed their own global ESG program and had us do the things that align with theirs, but also new business. And so we've acquired around $50 million of new business in the last couple of years from customers that selected Halo specifically because our ESG program aligned with their ESG goals as well. And to talk a little bit more about that, about how that market has been trending and the things that we're seeing, I'll turn it over to Phil, because Phil has some great metrics that we developed for this presentation that will talk about those 2 channels where it's either specific customer driven or just the overall trends we're seeing in the market for ESG. The whole purpose of this presentation is to help you determine what's best for your businesses in terms of ESG, especially if you work with brands that operate globally. And so you don't have to go through this list from 2019 to 2023. You can learn from us in terms of the investments we've made that weren't necessarily market driven. We just thought that they were the right things to do, but we found that they weren't tied to revenue. And so the things we'll talk about today and we'll focus on toward the end of the presentation are those things that are really the things that have driven the revenue for Halo.
Yep, thanks, Terry. And then one thing I'd like to mention too is, like, as much as sustainability is a feel good, everything we're doing is ROI driven. I mean, as we've engaged with the United Nations Global Compact and we participated in some of their programs, everything we talk about with them is really more of like, how are you going to communicate the ROI to your leadership? Because they understand that without that buy-in, it's hard to integrate sustainability policies into and protocols into your business strategy. So as Terry and Robert mentioned, I work in sustainability, but my daytime job is business development. So we do a lot of research and looking at the numbers. So the last year, what we did was we looked at about 5 years of RFP data, it's a request for proposal, and tried to understand, like, what is the profile the market is looking for right now? What are they looking for when they look for a distributor partner? So we took all that information and we put it together and said, okay, so during the RFP stage, it's kind of like, are we a match? Can we work together? So we took these projects and we thought it best to look at 2019 as a baseline and 2023 as where where we're going to see the trend go to. The reason we picked these years is 2019 is when we really started to see more questions at RFP around sustainability, and also because the years have a similar amount of projects, and if you put inflation in there, a similar estimated revenue value. So it gives us the best back and forth. So when we look at this right here, these are all coming under what we saw as the risk aversion topics of what is in an RFP. And what surprised us when we looked at that data was that 25% of the overall questions asked at RFP are about risk aversions. And the reason that section is so important is because risk aversion is them looking at you and saying, can we work together? Are we a match? And if you can't meet that criteria, then you typically get taken right out of the process before you can tell them how well you're going to do a job, you do the job for them, and how great your service is. So looking at this, if we look at the most material topics around risk aversion, it's distributor compliance. This is meeting regulatory and business requirements, information security, which is a great topic that we hear a lot about, but we won't talk about that today. Product and supplier compliance. This is auditing, testing, and sourcing protocols. And then supplier diversity. We saw a lot of energy around this in the US during 2019 and 2020. And then around 2021, it started to taper off. And that was probably due to some political climates in the US. It's still a very important topic. We still get asked about it every day, but the new questions being asked to us are limited. So we've built a supplier diversity program that answers most of those questions, provides the data that they want. And that has really stabilized in the last few years and hasn't become such a hot point topic for us as well. But environmental sustainability, this has grown exponentially over the last 5 years. And the thing about when you look at this is this varies by customer and the services requested. As Terry mentioned, we do a lot of different types of work, but it can be a deal breaker with most clients these days if you can't demonstrate the commitment or provide the reporting that they're looking for. All right, so I'm going to dig a little more into the environmental sustainability part of it. And I'm sorry, I have a squeaky chair, and sometimes I just got to move so I don't hear the squeaks anymore. So we're looking at this, and these are the main topics we see around environmental sustainability at RFP. Distributor governance, that's what the distributor is doing, what your program looks like, what are your protocols. Do you have policies in place for a variety of different things? Like, what are you specifically doing as an organization? That is most of what we get. What does your program look like, and how are you building it? And that's what Terry was showing with that overall growth of what we're doing on our journey is, what are the things that we're doing to make sure that we're a sustainable company? They ask questions around waste and recycling, but it's very minimal. Water really hasn't hit for us very hard yet, but we can see it up on the horizon. The two areas that we're seeing a lot of energy around are eco products or sustainable products, whichever way you want to say it, and carbon emissions. Eco products, I assumed it would be higher, before we started this project. But what I think we're mostly seeing is that most customers, and since there isn't direct regulations on what makes something sustainable. There isn't regulatory compliance in most countries. The EU's got a lot of stuff that they're building out, but there isn't really a lot of defined areas. And most clients are still figuring out what that means to them and how to align eco products into their initiatives for their companies. So we don't see as many questions because they haven't wrapped their arms around it. But that's very different with carbon emissions. They understand what commitments they're making and what they need to know to be able to line up to those commitments. So when I say that, what I'm really leaning into mostly is a lot of companies we see are making a commitment either with United Nations Global Compact, or they're making individual commitments. They're making a commitment to the Science Based Target Initiative. They're saying publicly that by 2030, if they're aligning with that one, or by 2050, they're going to move to reduce their overall GHG emissions. And when they make those public commitments, they've got a few years to kind of figure out how they're going to do it. So that's where they're coming to our industry now and starting to say, okay, I need to see the transparency on what the carbon is associated with what I'm buying, because they're developing baselines of what that looks like. And then they've got to figure out how that works in their overall organization of saying, what specifically do I need to do to reduce those emissions and be able to show progress towards those commitments they're making. So for us, Terry and I look at this and we're saying, this is a public commitment, and this is somewhere where we've got to work as, of this industry in general, no matter where you are on the globe, of how do we help each other out and start to really figure out and wrap our arms around the way that we can provide this information to our customers.
Yeah, one key takeaway there too, if you get the opportunity to just Google the United Nations Global Compact on climate change, and you'll see a lot of the brands and global companies that have made this public commitment to reduce their emissions and build a strategy to reduce their emissions. And that strategy is built on metrics. And so a lot of the initiatives that we're doing now are extremely metric driven. And we'll talk about that in a little bit later in the presentation and how valuable that is. A few years ago in our industry here in the States, distributors would come up with kind of a feel-good 1 or 2 page things that they're doing for ESG. And we were winning a lot of business from our competitors that were doing that because we had a very metric-based approach to the things that we're doing. So those initiatives on the previous slide were all built around the things that we're measuring. And what really surprised us with a lot of large customers was that some of the numbers that we were measuring, the baseline numbers, were not very impressive. And we were hesitant at first to even publish those and share those with those clients. But the fact that we were measuring them and had a baseline and then ultimately had a goal against that baseline was exactly what they were looking for. So if you're building an ESG program, what we will be encouraging you to do is to look at those things that you can measure and how you're going to measure them. Reach out to your customers to make sure that they align with what the customer expectation is. And that will take you much further, much faster, and it will help save a lot of time and energy and not focusing on those things that you thought might be a feel-good initiative to do. And really in terms of how it's being measured and how that impact is being measured will not resonate at all with your customers.
Thanks,
Phil?
thanks, guys, for sharing that so far. I do have a question that hasn't come through on the questions, but I know one that has popped up recently with some of clientele that I'm sort of working with, and that's around that carbon emissions that you were just talking about. So the clients are asking how we're measuring it and obviously passing that on and so that they can put it towards their targets. But through doing research here, and I don't know if it's different in the US, you might be able to answer this, but I contacted a lot of our key sort of suppliers here, and a lot of the suppliers said, no, we're not measuring that just as yet. And the cost to measure it was quite extreme. How are you guys sort of finding that in the US, and how are you making that part of your, your topics when clients ask?
Well, I can speak to that, and Phil can add. That was we really wrestled with that. We work on any given year, we work with 3,000 suppliers, and around 70% of our purchases go to 200 of those suppliers, which we are our preferred suppliers. And we had educational webinars with our suppliers that said, this is a hot topic. Our customers they're requesting this today, but have given us deadlines of when they will be requiring it in order to do business with them. And so we have to solve this. So among those 3,000 suppliers, we obviously have a couple million different SKUs that we would have to measure. One estimate, we went out to RFP to providers of carbon intensity or emission intensity. And one estimate to do the carbon intensity on all the products that we sell on any given year was about $1.6 million US. And there was just no way that that would pass through our budgeting process. And so we found a couple very good providers that can do a job that is certain. They can provide the emissions information that is certified. So that's one of the things that our customers will ask us is, where did you get this number? What was your calculation? What methodology did you use? And both of these top sources that we've landed on can do that. What we found is that there's a wide range of costs associated with carbon intensity on a per product basis. And there are some platforms that when you factor in the platform license and a variety of other things, forget about the additional manual labor that we would have to go through to input all of the data on a specific product. But in terms of US dollars, it would be around $120 per product. And we had to try to determine who is going to pay for that. Will that be Halo? Will that be the supplier? And will that be the client? And that's part of the economic model that we had to build to get that through our budgeting process. And we also realized that there's no way we're going to do it on every product that we sell. There's, $1.6 million was prohibitive. And so we were able to land on a provider that can do it relatively reasonably. And relatively reasonably for us is around $20 to $30 per product again, you have to also factor in that you're loading in a lot of the data. So there's manual time and cost associated with that. So we're focusing in currently on our top 200 or so products by purchase volume. And then we also have a direct import division within Halo, and we're carving out a couple hundred products for them as well, because they're doing it for these same customers. And so if we're buying it from a domestic supplier, then that's one channel of investment on a per product basis. And we're negotiating that with each supplier on who pays for that. And then for the things that we're doing from a direct import standpoint, then we're paying for that and just building it into the cost to the customer.
Thank you so much for that. That definitely helps answer that question. It is an expensive topic, that's for sure. And that was some of the sort of main rejection we're getting from suppliers, is it's just too costly at the moment. So I think the idea of maintaining that on the top 200 products is probably the better way to do it. So thank you for sharing that. I'll let you continue.
And Robert, I would say too that, like, I hope what you're hearing is that we're collaborating with our suppliers and hoping to do what's best. I mean, we don't want to put them through the ringer as well, because we know that there's a cost that after a while will start to escalate, and then it always comes back to the cost of whether you're competing upon, a product that meets emissions and sustainability standards versus just a cost basis. A lot of what we've been doing for the last few years too, as Terry is telling, we're working this out, is we've been using a lot with our consultants, and there's some free things out there that you can get to, is that we've been doing a lot of revenue-based models based upon, specific category of the product, and then looking at the overall revenue and be able to calculate that GHG emission. If you have to, it's a good interim solution. The problem being is, if any of you, really pay attention to this, if you're doing a revenue-based model, there's no way to reduce emissions without reducing the spend with you. So it's what we've done in the last couple of years, is we're like, hey, we're figuring this out. This is a great baseline, but let's move to actual product data in the long run.
Perfect. No, thank you for sharing.
All right. How far do you want us to go, Robert? Do you want us to go all into this? I know you gave us some outlines, but I just want to make sure that we're keeping with time and we're doing well on this.
Yeah, so far pretty good on time. So yeah, let's keep on moving.
Yeah, so Phil will talk through. Phil was one of the participants from Halo in the United Nations Global Compact Accelerator Program at the United Nations. And so, it was a very select group, but it also included, again, a lot of global brands were participating in that as well. And so what we're going to talk about for the next few minutes is how we built our sustainability strategy, and what emphasis, where you should spend your time and your energy to have a sustainability program or an ESG program that will resonate with global brands and domestic brands in Australia as well, without scratching your head, spending a lot of time that you may not need to spend. So pretty simply, and Phil, jump in here with we can't give each other, kind of the nonverbal cues of you take this and I'll take this.
Go for it.
And if you let me, I'll talk the whole way. So please interrupt at your convenience. The first thing that we did when we went through building our ESG program was a stakeholder analysis. And so we identified what matters most to your stakeholders. And we started with materiality assessment. And basically we went to the key stakeholder groups at Halo. And so this were obviously our customers. And we bifurcated those customers essentially by volume. So we knew for smaller and medium-sized customers, what's material to them may be different than some of our larger global customers that we work with. Another key stakeholder group were our employees. We have 2,100 employees. We wanted to see what was material and what was valuable to them. And we also sent the same materiality survey to our suppliers as well, to see what was more valuable to them. And so we came up with a list of those things that were important to the sustainability of any organization, along with some of the components of ESG as well. And based on the survey results, we focused really on those things initially that were in the upper right hand. They were both the most material to our internal and our external stakeholders. And that's where we spend a large portion of our time. So for example, you'll see, and Phil referred to it in a previous slide, the supplier water use was not really that material to both our internal and external stakeholders. And while we still track the water use, that's not as relevant. So we don't spend a lot of time on that. Obviously, and not surprisingly for any business, one of the things that was the most material was product cost. And any effort that we were doing that would increase the cost of products, that was a concern for all of our stakeholders. Corporate ethics, again, also very strong and very high. In that particular case for corporate ethics, we realized that we did have a lot of corporate policies on anti-bribery and anti-corruption and workplace safety and a variety of things. We hadn't really formalized those. We did not document those. We didn't show where we were versus the things that we knew we needed to do. And so that's another area that we focused on those first few years as well.
Yeah, and I just would have to say, Terry, because it's just on full disclosure, this is a little bit old. We did this 4-ish years ago. So we're also in the middle of a double materiality assessment that aligns with EU standards. And the components of it align with SASB, which is I can't remember what the acronym stands for. And that's a lot of things that you hear in ESG too, is there's a lot of acronym soup going on, but it's a board that says this is what the material needs to look like, and this is what happens, and how do we pull this together. So I'm
go
ahead.
Yeah, you brought up a really good point for this group, Phil, that the EU has much more stringent standards and guidelines for ESG than the US currently does. And based on what our larger clients are telling us, they believe that regardless of the political environment in the US, many of those standards are going to migrate over to the US. And so if you're dealing with brands that have a presence in the EU, many of these things are they're just going to be requirements that they have.
Yep. And then we understand that most companies don't have access to do a big materiality assessment like this. You can find ours and our ESG report on our website. And, when we finish this new one coming up, that will be put in our new report in 2025. And as Terry mentioned, it's information that's good to look at because, for us to mess in the US, we are pretty much a microcosm of the industry here. So it's helpful to get an idea of what that looks like when we're working with a lot of global and local customers. And so when we look at defining the focus, we know that that's not, easy to do a materiality assessment for everyone. But so what we did when we started, as well, that we think is usually a pretty good idea is we did an EcoVadis questionnaire. And if you're unaware of EcoVadis, they're an auditing firm. It's not overly expensive, but there is a cost associated with being audited. And the reason that was important to us is because as we looked at what mattered to stakeholders, and as Terry mentioned, we started to look through processes and how we built things. We said, hey, we've got some gaps here. When we took that EcoVadis assessment, it went to another level, because when you take that assessment, it's not just, can you do X? And then you say yes. It always has to have a document attached to it to show proof of that, or a certification, or a place on your website to go ahead and explain that. And hopefully I'm not over explaining to those that know, but I just want to make sure that I'm being thorough. The reason that was great for us is because it showed us that there were a lot of gaps in the data and the information we had put together. We thought we were doing really well, and then we saw what it looked like on a global scale of what you had to put forth, and we saw that we needed to up our game a bit and start to put together process documents and protocols to align to what most recognized most companies look for when they're looking at ESG.
Terry, one thing I would say is one of the key takeaways of this discussion is EcoVadis. When we were early in this process, we were trying to research and understand what was the most globally recognized, what was kind of the gold standard for ESG metric reporting and auditing. And we frankly chose EcoVadis because it was one of the most cost-effective ones, and we didn't know anything. we made a really good bet. We got very lucky because we're getting a request to see our EcoVadis submission, our data submission to EcoVadis on a daily basis from customers that we currently do business with, and also large customers that we don't do business with that are just looking at Halo to see if the metrics that we provided to EcoVadis align with what they want. So we strongly encourage everyone to use EcoVadis just because it's a global reporting platform, and it's one that what we have found anyway over the years, most global companies use.
Yeah, what are we looking at, Terry? About 160 clients connected right now?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. And I believe this is you. Or I can take it either way you
Right.
want to go.
Okay. So when you're walking through this process, when you're going through the thought process of building your ESG program, list what is most important to your stakeholders. The key thing for us is, what is the current ability to meet those stakeholder needs? What were the risks if we didn't take action on any of those 36 or so points on the materiality assessment? And then what are the benefits? And so again, we tied it back to revenue. Like, we only have so much time. We only have so many resources devoted to this. Where can we invest it where we're either going to get the greatest return, or if we don't do an action, where are we going to have the biggest revenue loss? And so that helps us fine tune that upper right quadrant of the materiality assessment even further.
And then the next step that we would suggest is just evaluating the impact, deciding where to take action. So now that you've got this overarching of what matters, and then assessing what happens if you do something and what if you don't do something. So we built it into like a pretty simple mapping exercise. And I say I borrowed heavily from a United Nations Global Compact training that they provided to us. And I just tweaked it a little bit here to see this. So what you can see from here is, what happens if you take an action. It just helps you to look at those focus areas and like what's going to be low priority and what's going to be high priority. Like, what's the significance of an impact if I don't take action, and what's the likelihood of that occurrence? So if we're talking about, worker safety, it's like the likelihood of occurrence is very high. And then significance would be just like, well, how much of that significance would go? So you get a good idea of what we're trying to put here. So it's really, I can't show you like what this looks like for you, but if you've done the materiality, you started to say, okay, what's the risk involved with this? And then start to move into the next part of just prioritizing those things. And again, we've said this in a bunch of different places, but I always come back to it is, we can't stress enough how much we've seen carbon emissions be part of this. It's just something that, when we were speaking at the Product Responsibility Summit in the US with PPAI, it was really a call to say, this isn't just a Halo issue. This isn't just a distributor issue. This is suppliers, distributors, the industry in general that need to get together and come up with solutions here. So like, when you ask like what we're doing, we're really trying to just continue to push this as a relevant topic for most of the industry. Okay, so now we're going to get into the how of your strategy. So once you kind of figured out, what's the impact, and then it's like, what do you have, what do you need, and how are you going to get there? So I've already kind of said that right there, but it's really identifying the people in your organization that can do things, the technology that you either have or that you need to get, and the metrics required for each of the focus areas you've developed. And the thing that we like to say too is like, we ask everyone about this stuff when we're trying to figure it out. Like when we picked EcoVadis, we didn't really know. And so now when we're talking to clients and suppliers and peers, we're always asking them, like, what are you using? Like, what standards do you align with? Like, what works or what doesn't work? Like by leveraging the experience of everyone that you have contact with, you can get a good idea of where to spend your time and where you can get things, and you can get further much faster. So, okay, next.
One other thing on that, Phil, there's a lot of the data that you may already have as part of just your standard operating procedures and your business. And it's how that data is formatted and how it's reported that is very important. And so some of the data that you'll where does that data exist? Much of that could be low-hanging fruit if you're running a relatively formal business as well. So it could be easier than what you think it may be. There's some that's obviously more complicated, like the carbon intensity and the emissions data on a per product basis. But some of the things that clients need to see metrics on, or EcoVadis when we submit to them, are things that we were already doing internally. They weren't formatted in a way that was acceptable or kind of the global standard on that reporting.
Yep, great point, Terry. You reminded me of an anecdote that we used on this. Like for our GHG reporting, when we were doing our scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, which is, what does Halo actually produce as GHG emissions? We had a consultant that helped us with the methodology. We had the metrics that we needed to get, and we had the people, and we had a process, but it was so cumbersome and involved many manual inputs from multiple team members, and it just was hard to do. So then after 3 or 4 years of doing that, we found a provider that does a GHG emissions inventory that helps us to pull that all together. But what the point I'm trying to make is what we were doing before worked, but it was incredibly frustrating because it was hard to get all that data together and align it all up. Okay, goal setting, Terry.
Sure. So in terms of goal setting, like I mentioned before, what we found is that customers were most interested in the methodology, not as much the actual data. And so your baseline when you that you use to set your goals, even if you look at some areas and say that doesn't look very good, whether maybe it's scope 1 emissions or something like that, or we could be criticized. Well, no, if you're transparent with customers that are very dialed into this or interested in this, then they want to see what your baseline is. And then they also want to see what your identified goals and timelines are. And there may be some of those things, and we found some of those things that's very complex. This is what our goal is, but it's going to take us 3 years to reach it. Customers applauded us for that and said, we didn't think you would have it next week. We understand that it's very complex, but the fact that you have a starting point and a goal is extremely important to us because that shows us that you're very focused on this and that you're aware of it. Transparency with your clients that are concerned about and want to align with ESG is extremely important. And so another key takeaway is don't be fearful of the information you provide being not very compelling. One, that helps you look at your business and say, this is an area where we need to improve, but customers will not ding you for that. Or, customers will not look poorly at that if you have a goal and also a timeline to reach that goal. Even if that timeline might be 5 years out, they know that you're aware of it. And that's the real selling point.
Yeah, and usually in these projects, I'm the enthusiastic, person that's really just like, yes, we've got to do this and we get this. I put this together to help to bring me back down to earth because it's all about realistic. Like I'll come in and say, this needs to be done. We have to get this done because it matters so much to, me personally and like what I want to do. And the team just stops me and goes, well, you're being way too ambitious. So I built this little Venn diagram just to say, hey, look, slow down. Look at the impact, look at the time and effort, what are the resources and budget, and based upon all those components, come back and put forth a realistic goal, as Terry said, because you shouldn't take everything on at once. And as much as we want to do things and want to say yes to our customers, they do react favorably to, yes, that's phase 2 in 3 years on this, and this is where we're getting to. Most customers, what we've found, are very I wouldn't want to say easygoing because that time is starting to get to go out a bit, but we're all in this together. Sustainability is still, in this level of it, still pretty new to most customers and to us. So there's how do I want to say this, Terry? There's a camaraderie and commiseration of like trying to figure out how to get this all done. Would you say that's accurate?
I think that's really accurate. And what Robert didn't, excuse me, what Robert didn't mention when he was introducing us But in terms of our informal roles, beyond our titles here at Halo, as you can probably guess by now, Phil is kind of our policy and procedure expert and wonk. And my role is to see how we're going to get it paid for and to get it at the executive level to get buy-in to make those investments. And so, yes, Phil will use this diagram often and say, here are 3 things that if we don't do by June, we're going to be dead and we're going to lose business. And I'm the one that says, those will cost $45,000 and that's just not going to happen. So pick 2 and we can try to sell that to the board and, make that investment.
All right, reporting. So that brings us to the last step is report, track, report, and refine. Terry, I think you're taking this one, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I am. So as I mentioned before, developing your baseline is extremely important on anything that you're doing relating to ESG, whether that's, again, that could be your employee anti-bribery training. It could be whatever it is, you have to show where you're at today. You have to be able to show what your goal is, and then you have to be able to report, in our case, on an annual basis, the progress you're making from that baseline toward that goal. And that's exactly what customers are looking for. They're not as focused on the baseline where you started. They are interested in what your goal ultimately is, but they want to be able to see progress.
Okay. And then that brings us to the roundup. So let's sum it up. If you followed us so far, I know we went pretty fast. You should have a pretty actionable plan around and roadmap around outlining the focus and resources and reporting necessary to get leadership buy-in. When we presented this to the Product Responsibility Summit, that's what we were trying to say was, you've got to look at the ROI. You got to find out what matters. What's the focus and impact? What are the market needs? What are the risk and benefits? What's your current state? And then look at the resources. What are the things that you can get done with what you have now? And where are things you may need to invest in? And then, as Terry just covered, goals and reporting. Just set the goal, give a completion date, give the baselines, and then go through and set that progress review cadence so that you can show that ROI back to your customers and your leadership.
And yeah, and on the reporting cadence, we just decided that based on what we didn't know, we were going to report on an annual basis. And so you don't really have to do your reporting on a monthly or quarterly basis, but you have to be able to know what is your focus going to be this year, and what's the goal by the end of the year, what's the deliverable. And so for us, we publish an annual report every year on what we're currently doing, the initiatives that we're going to do, like in this case, we're going to do for 2025. And then in 2025, we'll follow up on that reporting on those initiatives that we did, and then be able to prove out with documentation the actions toward those goals. Now, one last thing, this is the final slide, and we mentioned this at the session that Robert was at. This is a very, very good selling opportunity. And we've certainly seen that. Again, we've gotten a tremendous amount of new business. We've gotten greater spend from some of our larger global brands because of this. The interesting thing, we've had a difficult time. We have about 1,000 salespeople. Every year for the last 6 years, we've done educational webinars on what we've done in ESG, what our initiatives are, what our goals are, and similar information here to what the customer trends are. And for most people, they're trying to work on that trade show budget for their client. And ESG is very far in the back of their mind. One of the reasons we've been able to prove ROI on this is that we encouraged our salespeople to reach out to each one of their clients and say, do you have any interest in sustainability? Do you have an ESG program yourself? And if you do, we'd like to share ours with you to make sure that it's aligned. That starts a conversation that will surprise you. From a sales standpoint, the overwhelming feedback we received from our team is, I tried to listen to your webinar. I tried to get what I could from it, but it was nice to know. But when I emailed my customers and said, oh, by the way, we have an ESG program, do you want to know anything about it? I didn't realize it because I've never asked that question, but they're very, very focused on ESG right now. And they started bombarding me with questions and quotes. And so those quotes lead to orders and they lead to business, whether it's for an eco-related product or they just want to do more business with you because they know that you're measuring some of these key things. So as Phil mentioned, when we started this process, our mantra was that sustainability has to be more than just doing good. It has to be good for our business. We've been able to prove that with the investments that we've made in ESG. I think that you'll find the same thing, that if you do even a rudimentary program based on the steps that we've presented today, and you share with your customers that you have this program, no matter how detailed it is, you'll start the conversation. And many of those customers will be focused on sustainability and ESG. What we have found from a market trend is a lot of our global brands, again, driven by the EU standards, driven by the United Nations Global Compact that they have all signed on to. They're very, very focused on this. They're making buying decisions based on a fully fleshed ESG program. However, in the last 18 months, we've also seen a growing number of millennial buyers that they don't necessarily want to know all of the metrics or the data, but they are much more focused on products with a purpose. They're much more focused on products that align with their personal sustainability thoughts and goals.
Very much agreed there, and thank you, Phil and Terry, for your amazing content today. It's and thank you for sharing this actionable roadmap. I think that's the key part to it. And as you said, we've all got to take some action to the next steps. And I think industry-wide, worldwide, I should say as well, this is going to become a key focus, especially for our industry and various other industries. But concentrating on our industry is going to be a massive change that we're all going to see, and something I think we need to all take a big part in. So I do want to thank you both for taking the time out of your evening to join us and share these amazing resources with us. I know when we met over in the US in Washington just recently, I took plenty of notes, and I've filled up another page of notes just from today. So it's amazing how much more you pick up, and hopefully our audience here today has taken a lot of notes. But I think the key sort of driver out of this is start with something and have a goal. Start working out where you want to be, and then taking some progress. And I do like what you just said before around asking the customer, have you got any interest in sustainability, and what can we align with? I think you're going to get a lot of impact through that, and no doubt you'll get an ROI just from asking that simple question. And it's exciting to see the ROI that you guys have received just from investing in this program. And I know there's a lot more coming from the Halo side of things, and I'll be continuously watching that on the website, and no doubt we'll keep in touch. But it's exciting to see where we're heading. So I'll open it up to some questions, and if there are any questions, if anyone wants to just type into the Q&A section while we've got our speakers on board, we'll open that up and see if we've got any questions. I know one of the questions that sort of came to mind, just again taking some notes while we do wait and see if we get any questions pop up. But what in terms of the RFPs that are coming through Halo at the moment, what are some of the key trends that you're noticing, or some of the key questions that you're noticing through those RFPs that relate to what we've just been speaking? What are some of the key things that you guys are noticing at the moment through your sales reps?
All right, Robert. So to make sure I have it right, you're asking what are the key sustainability questions that were being asked?
Yep. Out of the RFPs.
So a lot of times the general, and I'm going to stop sharing at this point. The general questions are around what are we doing as an organization? Like, do you have headcount, specific to sustainability? What are the areas that you're involved in? What are your policies for environmental sustainability, for business ethics, for I'm trying to think of all the perfect ones here, but business ethics, supply chain management, just really an overall of just what are the policies and how does that come together? And what we found was, you know, I can't speak for everybody's, you know, structure, but we've got a legal department. So even if we're aligning to recognized standards like, you know, what is the United Nations Global Compact stance on XYZ, there's a lot of materials out there that will help you to write those policies, or at least be a starting point. And that's typically what I do is when I'm looking at putting this together, it's looking at the brands that I admire from this standpoint and seeing what they're writing and what they're putting together as, you know, the things that they're looking at, and then starting to build policies based on that. And then looking at it from a business perspective and say, how does this align up to our business? And, you know, what are the requirements of this? I know I'm taking a long stance and going around in circles, but it really is the policies.
Yeah.
And the next biggest thing is mostly from the clients that we're talking to is, you know, what are you tracking GHG emissions? What is your overall
emissions?
It's
And
what's in almost every single one. Go ahead, Terry.
And frankly, Robert, what many of our salespeople bring to us is, my customer is asking for this, and you tell them, like you do it. And so, or they'll normally connect the customer directly with Phil and myself. And if we have the data, we'll immediately share it. And if we don't, we'll find a way to get the data depending on the size of the customer. What's really been a trend for us the last 3 years is, for many of our clients, most of those things that we're doing from an ESG standpoint, we literally get forms that we have to acknowledge that and provide documentation. And so it's like a check the box. Like, before we're going to send you an order, before we're going to do business with you, you have to confirm to us that you have these policies in place and you have these metrics that you can provide on request. They may not want to see the whole report. They may not want to see a full metric deck, but they want us to acknowledge that if they are to ask for it, that we can provide it.
Perfect. No, thank you, gents, for that answer. I think that answers that extremely well, and definitely from my experience, when getting asked on RFPs lately, the info you can provide, even if you don't have the full picture, most people understand that it's a journey, and we're all walking that journey together. We haven't finished that journey, and no doubt we probably never will. But it's going to be a continuous growth sort of journey.
Well, and Robert, since our SVP and legal counsel is not on the call, I can disparage him. But if any of you are lucky enough not to be encumbered with a in-house legal team, there are a lot of policies that you could Google and say, oh, you know what? That looks a lot like what we do. And so we can commit to that policy and make sure that everyone in the organization signs off on that policy and agrees to it. And so you can put that in your suite of ESG documents that say that it's a policy. We're a little more encumbered than that because our legal team will say, well, no, we can't come right out and say that, and we can't have 100% compliance with 2,100 people. And we do a lot of arm wrestling with our legal team, and we say, well, look, we Googled it. It's pretty straightforward. This is this policy. And so there are a lot of resources. It takes a very little amount of time just to review 2 or 3 different, whether it's a source for carbon emissions or that you want to land on, or whether it's a policy statement or something like that. You can move a lot further faster than what we were able to 6 or 7 years ago.
Great. No, definitely a lot more information readily available to everyone now. And, again, with thanks to both yourself and Phil for taking the time and sharing the information. This is what it's all about, isn't it? Sharing the global information and being able to assist everyone on that journey. And I think if we can all collaborate and help each other, then it just paints a much bigger picture. We do have just a thank you from Anna, who's joined us today. And as she said, it's not a question, it's just an appreciation message. So thank you for sharing your experiences and your time, and great info and very helpful. So
Robert, what I would also close from our end with is that Phil and I and the rest of the team, but certainly Phil and I, you have our email address. Feel free to share that with not only the folks on the call, but your association in general. If they have any questions, or if they say, what source did you use? Did you land on for this? Because we don't want to go through a 2-year RFP process. We're happy to share our findings and our sources and things that have worked for us. So feel free to reach out to either one of us, or our general mailbox for the sustainability team is just sustainability@halo.com. And don't hesitate to ask us for any input or questions. We can try to point you in a direction that will save you a lot of time and effort, and possibly, quite a bit of money.
That's very true. Well, thank you both for offering that, and offering up your time this evening as well for you guys. And thank you for joining us. Don't think we've got any other questions, unless there's anyone on the panel that wants to add any questions before we close.
I don't know about you, Robert, but it's 5:30 here in the States, so we're going to go have a beer.
Oh, no, it's only the morning here, not beer time yet, unfortunately. Well, that looks like that's all, but very much thank you to Phil and Terry for making the time to join us this morning our time, or evening your time. Hope you enjoy your beer, well deserved, and thank you so much for sharing and being so open to collaborating with our association here and our members. And thank you everyone for joining us.
All right. Thank you all for your time. Appreciate it, Robert.
Thank you again.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, guys. In the next few days, you will also receive a follow-up email and a link to view the webinar recording, the presentation slides, and other relevant materials. I'll also include Terry and Phil's email address for further inquiries as well. So thank you everyone who joined us, and enjoy the rest of your day.